dependent on to control weeds and so forth. So George Radnovich is a landscape architect, and his company, Sites Southwest, has been contracted by Bernalillo County to address the issue of what can they do instead of glyphosate. So let me tell you a little bit more about George Radnovich. He is a senior principal of Sites Southwest, a landscape architecture and planning firm with deep environmental roots. He is best known for his efforts to create a more regional approach to site and landscape design in the arid Southwest. His design work fundamentally changed landscape architecture in our region, and he is well known throughout the Southwest as a voice for water conservation, xeriscaping, green building, and green stormwater infrastructure, and environmentally appropriate site and landscape design. He co-founded the Xeriscape Council of New Mexico and the New Mexico chapter of the U.S. Green Building Council. He's also a member of ARID LID, which stands for Arid Lands Low Impact Development, and other environmental organizations. So George, tell us about how Bernalillo County is going to manage their lands without Roundup.
That's a tough question. Thank you, Jim. Let me see if I can share my screen. All right. So I saw a lot of names I recognize, and hello to everybody. There were quite a few. And I put together a little, sorry, let me get this straight. I put together a little presentation, and if I can get your pictures out of my way, there. There we go. So there's a lot of people at this meeting that know a lot more about native plants than I do. But I know quite a bit about the native landscape, and we were hired by Bernalillo County, as Jim mentioned, to put together a vegetation management plan that considered the county ban on glyphosate. So what we are doing, and are still doing actually, is trying to finish that up. With COVID-19, our work pretty much stopped in March. And we were just about to, in April, end our study. However, when we were stopped in March, the most important part of what we were doing was also stopped, which was to watch and document how Bernalillo County takes care of their landscapes. And I don't know if any of you have any dealings with Bernalillo County, but when they stopped because of COVID-19, they really stopped. We haven't seen any of the project managers on this project since then. And so it's kind of in a holding pattern until we get through this. So I just wanted to say that. I noticed Sue Small in the audience, and she's in a committee, which is a steering committee that was set up for the project. And so what I'm going to do is go through where we were up to March, and love to hear your thoughts on this. By the way, anything that I say or that you say, I'm going to take notes, because I really would like to gain any of your knowledge to bring to our team, so that when we get back on this project again, we'll be able to bring that with us. The actual title of the project is the Bernalillo County Integrated Vegetation Management and Maintenance Plan, because they wanted us to talk about landscape management and also landscape maintenance. So we're working for Debbie Jo Alminger, who is the head of Parks and Rec for Bernalillo County, and Ed Martinez. He's with Bernalillo County, and he is the chief of land management, which is basically the group that takes care of county facilities. And I'm George Radnovich, as Jim said, and then Bob Oberdorfer with our company is the project manager on this project. So I couldn't get him to speak on this, so that's why I'm here. But I've been following it along and also helping with the project. So this is our scope of work. And I mentioned the steering committee that Sue's involved in. There's about 6 to 12 people involved in that steering committee, depending on the meeting time. And the steering committee is a group of environmentally active advocates that are trying to push the county in the direction of stopping the use of glyphosate, which the county has done. So all along the way, we've been meeting with the steering committee until we were stopped in March. So we'll continue meeting with them once we get going again. The project itself will consist of, or does consist of research. We're evaluating products as well as other approaches to management and maintenance. We're evaluating staff workloads and maintenance practices, as I mentioned. We're then going to recommend how the county can change, and we're going to do that by developing a cost-benefit analysis to show them what this really means to them. And we'll prepare a final report, and then we'll conduct some final public outreach. And we have had actually, I believe it's 3 public meetings as part of this project. And there have been a good turnout to each of those meetings. So it is a very interesting project and one that a lot of people are interested in. One of the things that we did is we had a peer cities survey. So we developed a survey form to ask them how they take care of their landscapes. And these landscapes range from open space, which is primarily native, to sports fields, which is obviously not. And so we're looking at the entire gambit of the kind of work that that the county does and that other cities do too. And when we put together this list, we tried to pick cities, excuse me, that had already banned or do not use glyphosate. And we tried to pick cities that were at least larger cities and larger places, counties as well, that were similar as we could get to Albuquerque in terms of climate and temperature and so forth. So some of them you'll see, Tucson, for example, is obviously quite a bit hotter than Albuquerque. El Paso, somewhat hotter. Boise, somewhat cooler. So we tried to get a good range of fairly large cities that had Parks and Recreation departments, as opposed to cities that had our exact climate. And some of those cities were very much involved in the movement away from, oh, I didn't mention one thing. The cities in red already have bans on glyphosate, or they're simply not using it. For instance, Santa Fe hasn't been using it for about 5 to 7 years. This is just a kind of some of the comments we received about it. And as you can see from the comments, I'm not going to read them, but as you can see from the comments, some people in the landscape and recreation and parks community are having a difficult time. I think that's something that I wanted to mention right here, is that, glyphosate has been with us for many, many decades, as you know, and it was a very, very important tool, or at least regarded as a very important tool by the Parks and Recreation departments at the various cities that we talked to. And many of them are having a very difficult time keeping up with what I'll call gravelscapes, or what a lot of people call xeriscapes, just because they had fallen into the trap of really relying on glyphosate. And most of these Parks and Recreation departments hadn't received much more budget to hire once glyphosate was not used, or once they started using more environmentally appropriate and ecologically appropriate techniques for Parks and Recreation. So it's become a real burden to a lot of them. And I'll go through that a little more in a little while. Not to say that they shouldn't move in this direction, but there is a lot of, I'd say, consternation and difficulty among all of the departments that we talk to moving in this direction. So what we're doing is what we did already is research best management practices, or what a lot of people call BMPs, for alternative control methods for weeds. And we've looked at everything from using goats and prison crews to homeless work programs and Youth Conservation Corps, our own Rocky Mountain Youth Conservation Corps here in the Bernalillo County area, as well as weed warriors and volunteer groups. So people across the country are using many, many different kinds of approaches and different kinds of new ideas to deal with weeds in a non-glyphosate world and even a non-pesticide world. But those groups have come with their own sort of issues as far as Parks and Recreation is concerned. So we looked at those alternative methods, and we also looked at mechanical controls for their landscapes. And you may not know, and I mentioned this a little bit a while ago, that the county land management department takes care of everything from the Bernalillo County Courthouse to sports fields and complexes and to open space, as well as trails and other kinds of landscapes. So it's a really wide range of landscapes. And so, for instance, the courthouse doesn't have very much landscape, but it has a lot of concrete. Well, the weeds that come up in those joints in between the pads of concrete are a real problem for them because they used to use glyphosate to take care of those. Now they're switching to either sealing the sidewalks, what we call expansion joints, or they're using weed control using machinery like weed whackers, and those cracks in the pavement are also a problem. So that becomes very difficult for them. There are also other ways to control weeds, as you know. Stabilized crusher fines and very fine crushed gravels can have a very good effect on weed management. And also native grasses and plants can tend to crowd out annuals and what many people call weeds as well, like that photograph on the left. Alternative equipment that we looked at was flaming them, weed burners, and some of you probably remember seeing weed burners in Albuquerque back in the 60s and 70s. There's also some new technology out there, which is called steam weeding. And those steam weeders, that's a photograph of a steam weeder in the bottom left corner. They come with their own problems. And so I'll go through all of those a little more detail when we get to the pre-recommendations stage of work. So as I mentioned, we had meetings with the steering committee, we had meetings with the public, and we had meetings with staff. We had 3 larger meetings with staff, and I'll tell you, those were very difficult meetings because when you take something that the staff regards as a tool away from them, it really, really rankles their, the way they used to do things. But they were very much against not being able to use glyphosate. They very much wanted to continue using it. I think now they understand that they had to go there, and now they're looking at ways to deal with things differently. But what we've done so far, and this is the part of the project that we didn't finish, is we've gone to various types of parks with land management last December when we got started on that part of the project. And of course, when we went around with them, they said things like, we mow this grass, which happened to be brown, and in some of these parks, twice a week or once a week in some of them. And so we took notes, but really when we had planned to go back was March, and of course that didn't happen. So this is just a listing of some of the facilities that we went to, and you can see on the bottom left-hand corner, that's Vista Grande Community Center, and that project, that place has a lot of concrete. It has a playground, and it's very, I'd say, maybe more difficult to manage without glyphosate than others might be. Some of the key findings that we discovered so far in our site visits is that without glyphosate, the staff had to increase labor, keep weeds under control. And what it did really is it robbed them of time to maintain irrigation systems and other kinds of technical work. They have to take care of everything from the lights to the irrigation to even dealing with, fallen bollards or something that someone vandalized in a park, like a park bench. So what's really happened is it's increased their labor, so it's taken away from those other things they do. The county was staffed. They were given, I believe the figure was $1.5 million to hire new staff and to get some new equipment. What that meant was about 10 new staff members, and you'll see in a little while that it's really not enough, but they're still understaffed trying to deal with the workload. One of the major problems that they have is that the public just drives by parks or streetscapes or trails, and they'll call. They'll try to call 311. Of course, that's a city number, but they'll call the county and they'll complain about weeds. And so the way that the county has worked so far, because they're so understaffed, is that they've been very reactive as opposed to proactive, because many times people will call county commissioners and others within the county hierarchy, and the staff will get taken off of a project they might be working on to get put on something to take care of a public reaction to what they see. Another thing that we learned is that the county has agreements with various entities. They have memorandums of understandings with Little Leagues and other kinds of volunteer groups to take care of ball fields, as an example. And so what happens, though, is that often, because those are volunteers, they don't always get managed. And when someone from the public sees that they're not being managed, they'll call the county and complain about it. And then the county will send out their staff and their field people to go take care of it. So I'm not trying to say anything bad about Little Leagues. I'm not trying to call them out, but if volunteers can't take care of it, the staff does. The other thing is that they are still using some pesticides and herbicides, not glyphosate, and they are experimenting with organic and more green pesticides in their new, in their year since the ban. This is a very telling graphic. Park staff, one person for 47 acres is what park staffing consists of right now. It's been raised over the summer of 2020 to one person for 35 acres. Open space, on the other hand, has about one person per 100 acres of open space. And it's been raised to about one person per 75 acres of open space. But look at those national averages over on the right. Now, granted, some of those averages are from places like Michigan, where they have to go out and cut grass and take care of weeds at a much higher level than we do. But they're also from wealthier places than we are. So, but you can see that we're woefully understaffed just from looking at that average. And we're on the lower side of how many people it takes to take care of parks and open space and trails and all the other things they take care of in general. I'm not expecting you to read all of this, But another approach that we looked at is IVM. Really the consensus about IVM is that they really want to use IVM and IPM kinds of approaches on their facilities, but it's not simple. The EPA, I'll just read that definition. They define IVM as a practice of promoting desirable, stable, low-growing plant communities that will resist invasion by tall-growing tree species through the use of appropriate, environmentally sound, and cost-effective control methods. A key to what both them and the Wildlife Habitat Council also talk about is control of lower growing communities. Most of the IVM and IPM that's being used on larger scale landscapes is really to take care of large rights of way for things like power lines and roadways. So the term IVM among large land managers like Parks and Recreation departments it started with really an approach that tries to keep trees at bay because it's infrastructure really. But they use everything from mechanical control to chemical control, natural control, and even the cultural use of the landscape and how it's managed. And as you know, all of you I'm sure know, that it's a very iterative process. And if Parks and Recreation departments and other large scale land managers are, it's not set up to have an iterative kind of process and a feedback loop on what they learn. Many of them have barely the time to go out and take care of the landscapes, much less to notice if a certain kind of vegetation is predominant one year and not so predominant in another. Some of them notice these things, but they just don't have the time to deal with it because of the problems with being understaffed. So those continuous feedback loops really require change and adaptation on a weekly or at least seasonal basis, and they rarely have the time to do that. The other thing that I mentioned a little while ago is that that paradigm shift from spraying glyphosate and other herbicides on gravelscapes is really going to have to take hold in a much bigger way than it has so far. And designers like myself who work for the county are going to have to stop using gravelscapes in order to really deal with this. And I'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end of this presentation. So monitoring these landscapes really requires resources, and it's very difficult for Parks and Rec departments to kind of turn on that dime within a year. They actually fought the county, the Parks and Recreation staff fought the county ban because they knew they would have a difficult time taking care of these landscapes. But they've come around, and they're definitely looking at other ways to take care of them. And actually, Bernalillo County bought a plot up near Lomas, and I know not all of you are in Albuquerque, but they bought a plot up near Lomas and Pennsylvania in Albuquerque, which is about halfway up into the heights maybe. And they are experimenting with different types of herbicides that are more environmentally friendly at that facility. So that's playing into what we're looking at as well. But another thing that the staff doesn't have is a good understanding of the many plant types that the native world really offers it. And so, they're not like a lot of us that may know more about native plants than others. Another thing that you should be aware of is that what I'll call home remedies cannot be used. So someone came to the county and said they use a solution of white vinegar and salt, and there may have been one or two other things in their concoction. And they can only use by county law and by the state of New Mexico Department of Agriculture only products that have been approved by the state. And so they can't use home remedies, and they can only use projects that are registered through that department. And many of those that are even registered are untried. This is just a partial list of some of the herbicides that they've been looking at and that we've been following with them. And you can see on the, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th column over is how we rated effectiveness. And it isn't a scientific study. I would call this anecdotal at best. But what they registered, or what they called out to us as a kind of non-effective, a low effectiveness product, is really basically it really comes from their use, and not in a scientific kind of way, which is why they bought that 2 acres I just mentioned. So they've used Avenger, they've used Cheetah Pro, and I don't know if you even know some of these products. They've used Battleship. They haven't used many. And all of the ones that are on this list right here, some of you may know some of these products, I don't, haven't even been registered by the Department of Agriculture for the state. And so they can't use them without having them be registered. So they are trying them, but they're having mixed results, I'd say. And there's nothing scientific about the way that they tried them. So we're also, as I mentioned before, evaluating the methods, and we're going to do a cost-benefit analysis based on that. These are some of the mechanical methods that I mentioned earlier. And here are some of the problems we discovered. The example I used of cleaning and sealing joints and cracks in pavements, well, it's just not cost effective for county crews to go out and spend time to fill joints with silicone or some kind of product like it to stop weeds from coming up through it. So they could outsource them. They could even encourage people like me to design with it, but they have a lot of land that they're managing right now that doesn't have it, and they just don't have the manpower to do it. Stabilized crusher fines, obviously that works pretty well, and they are encouraging people like me to design that way. I don't know if any of you have heard of a Harley rake. These really don't seem very suitable to me. I put it in the presentation because it's in our study, but it just beats up the land and pretty much takes out all vegetation. So for areas that you might want to be weed free, if it's just bare dirt, it could work. And maybe in other parts of the country, it works pretty well to dethatch, but here it really doesn't do a good job of keeping weeds out. Flaming I mentioned, but since they were using that kind of an approach back in the 70s, risk management at the county has told them that they cannot use propane for any of their activities, and they especially can't strap it to their backs to go flame weeds in medians and trails and so forth. Steam weeding we had some hope for, but it really doesn't kill the roots of the plants that it kills, and it uses large amounts of water, so who would want to use it here? And to some degree, the residual water really encourages additional plant growth in those landscapes. So it just really doesn't make sense to use that. So where do we go from here? Well, as I mentioned, we were stopped short of giving them recommendations and finishing the look we were taking at their maintenance of parks and everything from parks to open space so far. But we're really going to have to change the paradigm, I think, in the end about using pesticides on landscapes. And that paradigm shift is going to have to occur with us, with the park staff, and with the public in general. We're really going to have to change the expectations about what parks are, how they can be taken care of, and what these herbicides really do to the land and to the groundwater and to places that people use, and part of that's going to be increasing staff levels and equipment levels, something we have very little money to do in New Mexico, and to increase training. We're also going to have to educate the public a lot more than we have so far. That photograph on the left is what the Little League is asking for. So they're asking for just bare dirt. They would rather see that than, and I shouldn't say they as if they all have asked for that, but that's the word we got from the Little Leagues, that really they'd rather see bare dirt than quote unquote weeds. The paradigm shift there is going to be to allow those native grasses to take over and to treat it as a plant and a landscape, and to change that through that paradigm through education and through landscapes that the county just isn't going to be able to change. Here's another example, which has to do with the maintenance of Little League fields. Little League fields and the landscapes around them are managed, as I mentioned earlier, by Little Leagues. So those volunteer groups, mostly parents, agree to take care of facilities like softball fields and football fields and soccer fields and even playgrounds. Well, if they don't take care of them, it all falls to Parks and Recreation staff. And you can see just from looking at these photographs what happens. A small problem like a little rivulet in the Georgia red clay in a baseball field can turn into a mess on a parking lot that people just don't want to see. And so they'll call Parks and Rec staff, which then takes them away from other work they do. Granted, this is also something that we need to educate people on. And that education process is going to be a long one. You've seen medians just like the one on the left. There are plenty of them all around Albuquerque and Santa Fe and Las Cruces if you're from those places. Maybe even Silver City if you're from there. Really, what happens without maintenance and without the use of some herbicides is what happens on the right. That's the same project at a different point in time, and it's because they just couldn't get to the landscapes when they really needed to. So taking a tool away, as they put it to me and to Bob, is the reason that this is happening. But the other thing is, it really needs to change to a different kind of landscape. So, and I know all of you know about this, but really we're going to have to re-educate people about landscapes. And granted, we're going to keep sports fields, that's not going away, but landscapes in parks and open spaces could be a little different than they are right now. Landscapes in parking lots could be quite a bit different. Landscapes and hardscapes in front of courthouses are going to have to be a little different, and we're going to have to think about them differently when we design them and as we take care of them. So they really need to reinforce the natural environment, as all of you know. And in general, in Bernalillo County, it's the central Rio Grande Valley, which I'll include the East Mountains in because they take care of facilities in the East Mountains. So, native plants to our region, to our multiple ecotones that they take care of, should really predominate local landscapes in the future. The local history and culture should infuse that design. So we can still keep landscapes in general in parks for specific uses like playgrounds and like streetscapes and like playing fields, but things have to change in those interstitial spaces around those landscapes. The climate must be our guide in the future, and as many of you know, I know Judith participated in a study that the Nature Conservancy just put together about climate-ready plants, but we need to be ready for that. And we're going to need to draw our inspiration from the native world. And even though we're at the same time harvesting water and trying to feed these landscapes with additional water through water harvesting and green stormwater infrastructure, they too have their own set of problems in terms of the kind of plants that grow in those spaces and how to take care of them, and where they drain to, and the water quality of how they drain away from those features downstream. So I know you all know this, and I didn't include these mountains in this, but you know, we have a range of landscapes in the Bernalillo County area, from you know the sandy soils and the predominant grasslands on the west side to the ponderosa pine forests in the East Mountains and everything in between, including the Rio Grande Valley. And so they have a lot of different kinds of landscapes to take care of. And each of the landscapes, when designers design for them, needs to take this into account in the future more than they have and than we have in the past. Places like the Bukeki open space can be an example for the county, and that's a predominantly native landscape park here in Albuquerque, or in the Albuquerque area, of about 30 acres. This is a project in Santa Fe that actually we designed, but I don't know how many of you have been in Santa Fe lately. I just went up last weekend to have a little picnic with some friends, and this project was being taken care of by a landscape company called Living Waters, Mark Broughton up there. He's a great person. He took care of these medians better than anyone I know. And it got so hard for him. He took care of the medians for about 7 years. It got so hard for him to take care of them, given the reactions from the public that didn't know about native landscapes and what they should look like. He finally quit. He finally just told the city of Santa Fe, I just can't deal with this anymore, and I can't do this. And so this landscape from this specific spot, I should have stopped and taken a picture, but it looks very different today. Those native grasses are just beat up dirt right now, and those plants have been just trimmed down to the ground. So it's quite different, and the Parks and Recreation Department just didn't know how to deal with it. I'll bet you that this landscape turns into a gravel scape, excuse me, scape in the future. It's going that direction. Parks should look like this in the future. They should look like native landscapes, and I think that'll come, but it's going to take a lot of re-education. This is a park we did, and this is an older picture, but this is a park we did up at High Desert that was using native plants and xeric plants primarily, but we tried to make it more park-like in the way it looked and acted. But it's a water harvesting park. It harvests all of the water from the streets near it and from the arroyo that it is built within. And so projects like this we'll see hopefully more of in the future. But we're also going to see projects like this because people frankly like to lay on the grass under a tree. And so while that may not be the best use of water, I think we're still going to see some of those kinds of parks in the future. And so how do we deal with them, and how do we take care of them, and how do we irrigate them in a way that is more water sensitive? And so really this whole breadth of landscape is what Bernalillo County needs to figure out a way to take care of, and what we're going to try to recommend for them in the future. With that, I think that was my last slide. I hope I didn't talk too long, but I'm happy to go back to any of those slides and revisit them. And I didn't see the chat while I was talking, so again, I hope I didn't talk too long, but happy to talk about it now. And I'd love to hear discussion about this, because we really need to find out what experts like yourselves have to say about it, and really what you think we should do. I think though, before I kind of turn it over to you, I'd just like you to put your sort of Parks and Recreation hats on, if you can. It's you know, it's a different world for them than it is for a homeowner, for instance, and it's quite a different story to take care of a 200-acre open space as opposed to a backyard. So with that, let's talk about it. If anyone's asking questions or chatting, you might be.
George, I just figured out how to unmute. And so I can read you some of the questions now.
Awesome.
The presentation was kind of demoralizing to somewhat realize that so much needs to be done. Like you say, a paradigm shift. But anyway, let's go and look at some of the questions. So here's the first one that I see is, how do you get rid of bindweed with its very deep roots?
Wow.
Propagation by seed and runners.
Boy, that's a good question. Really, bindweed loves sunlight, and I'd ask any of you who could answer this question to please feel free to speak up. The way that I've found to take care of it for the most part is to find plants that outcompete it and use them to provide more shade in areas where it's a problem, and to just work at it. I don't have many answers for bindweed. I know a lot of people, I'm sure, still use glyphosate, and as you know, if you go to your local nursery or Home Depot, you can sure still find it. So it's not banned for anyone but Parks and Recreation. And I do apologize. I hope that I didn't demoralize everyone. It's really just, it's what the project is. So I was trying to be honest about it.
No, that was just a personal opinion. So I just realized what it's going to take.
Yep.
Anyway, let me see if I can find the next one here. It says, since county hasn't been doing anything, it should be a good time to assess the problem. This is from Janet Herbst. What annual plants weeds are found, and what problems do they pose? And unfortunately, I can't see the rest of it. There it is. Such as stickers blocking sight lines and so on, or are some of them forage for native bees, providing pleasing ground cover during the growing months? You want me to read that again?
Could you?
Yeah, I finally got the whole thing. Since county hasn't been doing anything, it should be a good time to assess the problem. What annual plants, that is weeds, are found? What problems do they pose, such as stickers blocking sites and so forth? Or are some of them forage for native bees, providing pleasing ground cover during the growing months? I guess it's kind of
It's kind of more of a comment than a question, I think, for the most.
yeah, and actually, if Janet, if you want to unmute, you might want to clarify your question. If Janet is still available.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just think that problem assessment is key. And I know it goes back to staffing not knowing the plants, or maybe needing the community's help for this. But you know, what's growing? Like, if things have been killed for so many years, do we know what's growing and what to do about it? And just doing that part could take a year.
I agree. You know, most county staff doesn't have training in native plants, in weed identification, in annual identification. I mean, they know the big ones. You know, the ones that everyone sees: tumbleweeds and kochia and bindweed, and you know, the kind of the plants that we all know to be problem plants. But many of them that don't know the difference between a threadleaf groundsel and you know, a indigo bush. You know, I don't believe they're trained that way. So they're really just they just work the landscape the way they've been working it for many, many years. And so one of the ways I think that could be helped is for landscape training. And that is one of our recommendations and has been from the beginning. We just haven't gotten to that stage yet in our work. They really need to learn from experts and from people that know native plants, from people like yourselves. I don't think there's a lack of interest, but they do have a big task in front of them. You know, they aren't, shouldn't say allowed, but they aren't necessarily given the time, given how few of them there are to do this. So I tend not to blame anybody for that. I think it's about education and about changing the way landscapes are designed and managed. All of those landscapes that landscape architects and landscape designers that have managed that the county is taking care of weren't designed with this in mind. You know, they weren't, and even street medians. And so they, you know, they have a task in front of them trying to take care of landscapes that were designed, you know, almost with herbicides like glyphosate in mind. I don't think that's the right way to design. It's not what we try to do, but it's something I see. I'm not sure that answered your question very well, Janet, but it's a tough problem. As far as sightline goes, that is a problem. And you know, one landscape that I'm aware of that the county's having a hard time managing is the new trail down to Valle de Oro. And I don't know how many of you have been down there, but that trail got overtaken by 6 and 8 foot tall weeds, like kochia, last year. I went out there as a volunteer with them to take them out, and those trees were hard to take down, and they just couldn't get to them because of all their other needs. And so the county commissioner from the South Valley asked for volunteers, and you know, the county staff came out on a weekend to work on that, and they took them all out. But that was a sightline problem and a big danger, especially for bicyclists and pedestrians. So they're aware of that problem.
Well, here's another question. This one's from Michael Jensen. What is the cost of increasing staff time to manually or mechanically remove invasive noxious weeds, as well as the delay in completing landscaping projects in order to remove or significantly reduce invasives? The opportunity cost, basically.
Does
that make sense? Or
no, it does. I'm not sure I can answer that at this point. I don't really have an answer for what the cost of increased labor is. I mean, I could anecdotally tell you, Michael, that their workload has doubled, but I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that one. I really don't. Do you have thoughts on that?
yeah, Michael, if you are available, you could unmute and
Yeah,
comment.
I'm unmuted. I don't have numbers either. I haven't found anything with numbers because I don't think that's something that gets studied. So it'd be really interesting if you were able to continue this project for a while and collect that kind of information. We know just from your presentation that they need to hire staff. And even when they use volunteers, staff have to be there to monitor them or, you know, clean up after them, because volunteers, God love them, you know, necessarily the most effective and efficient workers. And I am aware of projects using volunteers that actually pulled up a whole bunch of native vegetation thinking it was something else. So it's a quandary, you know, and the big thing is if it takes 2 or 3 years to get, you know, some area under control where you think that native plants will be able to outcompete it, that's a lot of time gone by when you could have, you know, gotten that done and moved on to something else. So that's the opportunity cost issue. When you've got scarce resources, where's the most effective place to put them?
I agree, Michael. And I know, I mean, we've talked about this, and one thing I will say is that the landscapes that they have been given in the past kind of already have a maintenance built into them because of the way they were designed. And one of the things that can be done, and this is actually one of our tasks in the end of this project, is to provide some prototypical landscapes for parks that in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Bernalillo County can be designed differently, designed with a different kind of maintenance involved and intended, so that they don't have these expanses of gravel, so that maybe they don't have the same kind of jointing system in concrete that they have now. Maybe it's designed a little differently. That native landscapes be allowed to return to those peripheral areas, I'll call it, the interstitial areas I mentioned before, that that becomes the tool becomes education of the public there, as opposed to, you know, hand pulling them. And maybe they're redesigned or rethought as native landscapes and not as an area that needs to be sprayed and or hand weeded.
Can I just jump in really quickly one more time? So
Sure, go ahead.
This landscape behind me that you can see, that is the Playa Lake out at Valle de Oro National Wildlife Refuge that was dug out. I mean, it was just scraped clean and dug out, shallow, you know, area. And when water came in, I mean, they filled it. And when the water came in, all of this vegetation grew from the seed bank. They didn't plant any of that stuff. And it's an awesome landscape. I mean, there's any given time when I was out there last year, there were, you know, a dozen different kinds of water-loving birds out there. And now it's not perfect. There are some things there that they would prefer not to have, and there are some things they'd like to have that aren't there, but it's a functioning ecosystem. So I totally get your point. I mean, we shouldn't let the perfect, you know, drive away the good. But nevertheless, I mean, yeah, it's a fine line. There are some kinds of invasives that you just really can't let go because they'll just outcompete everything. But yeah, you can have a lot of stuff that is noxious or invasive that contributes to an overall, you know, really good functioning ecosystem. So that, I'll shut up.
Could I ask something, please? This is Susan. I wanted to remind you when we started this that Beyond Pesticides did make an offer to come out and put together maybe a demonstration project to see if, you know, if something like that would work, and maybe they'd still be interested in doing so.
Yeah, do you remember, Susan, the county and that's a good comment, the county wanted to wait until this project was done. COVID really put it really changed the dynamic, and you know, we just haven't been able to finish the project. But the county didn't say they didn't want to use Beyond Pesticides or listen to them and hear from them and even do a project with them. They just wanted to wait until this project was done. So our time frame got elongated because of COVID-19, and that's, I guess, the real answer to that. We just haven't been able to finish yet.
So you might want to get back to them at a later point?
Correct. And I don't know if all of you know, Susan mentioned Beyond Pesticides. They're a organization that is, I believe, based in Boston, I think.
DC.
DC. And they are trying to help places around the country develop landscapes that are pesticide free, that don't require the use of pesticides. And Susan got a proposal from them that she passed on to the county at about the same time that we got started with this project. And the county mentioned that they'd be happy to look at that, but they wanted us to finish this look at the maintenance of parks and landscapes and finish this project up first. So just not much has happened since March. So we should have been done. Actually, our plan and our schedule required us to be done with this work in early May. So when everything stopped, that's when we stopped.
Let's move on to some other comments. There was a question about acronyms. Dara and Diane responded, and IVM stands for Integrated Vegetation Management. And, or that is, Dara said that, and Diane said that IPM is Integrated Pest Management. And then there's a question again from Janet Herbst. Some plants are opportunistic and will grow when the dirt is disturbed. The Harley rake. What does Little League want? Why does Little League want bare dirt?
That is a very good question. I think they see native grasses as weeds. I mean, people are sports minded, are really there because it's outdoors and because it's a sport. They're, you know, they don't necessarily notice the plants other than that grass that their son or daughter is playing on, or their friends in a softball field. So, very, very good comment. I don't have an answer other than that.
George, someone responded that it's easier to find the lost balls
Well,
with that grass.
That might be the reason.
that's potentially a good reason. You know, I think there's a lot of people that like a neat and tidy landscape, and you know, as native plant experts and aficionados, you know that native plants just grow as they grow, and so I don't think everyone looks at it that way. I think there's a segment of our society that likes to see everything neat and tidy, and they see that bare dirt as being a neat and tidy approach, as opposed to those multiple types of grasses and wildflowers, you know, growing in those areas. So that one photo I showed, when I saw that site, I just couldn't believe it, because they had just finished doing maintenance, I'll say, quote unquote, on that site, and it was at about a 2-to-1 slope, as you may have noticed. So very, very steep site that could have benefited from plants being, you know, helping to control that erosion. And obviously someone didn't see it that way. And I'm sure that someone in the public, or maybe the Little League, asked Parks and Recreation to get rid of the weeds, you know.
All right, let's move on to this question. This one's from George Miller. Doesn't the city of Albuquerque still spray Roundup? The city?
They do. We don't do a whole lot of work for the city, our company. So we did talk to them, but they do still use glyphosate, yes.
Oh,
I don't think there's a plan, George, to stop using it. I believe they using it to this day. Yeah.
here's another question from Gene. This one says, have you considered diverting rainwater with swales supported by small boulders?
Oh, absolutely. You probably saw that photograph of the median in Santa Fe. That is one example of a project that used a median. There wasn't any dirt. The engineers at the time, which was 20 years ago, wouldn't allow slotted curves, but quite a few landscapes, maybe not public ones, but quite a few landscapes around Albuquerque now that allow that to occur and that embrace that encourage water and the reclamation and the revegetation of swales and using boulders and cobblestone to help to nest water and allow it to seep into the soil behind check dams. And that technique is being used more and more today than it ever has been in the past. And it continues to grow and change that approach.
The rocks can stabilize the swales if they're not, if they have a bit of size to them. You can have rocks on the downhill side kind of can stabilize the swales.
Absolutely right.
All right, here's a question from Kit. How much turnover is there in the Parks and Recreation Department with the staff? How much and what kind of training do they receive about plants?
No, we didn't ask them that question, but anecdotally, everyone that we talked to in the department had been there for many years. And what typically happens in the Bernalillo County, and I know it happens in the city of Albuquerque Parks and Recreation Departments, as well as in Santa Fe and other cities, is that someone who starts out cutting the grass ends up working their way up the ladder and becoming a manager for multiple parks or multiple people. So they grow that way. Everyone that we talked to had been with the Parks and Recreation Department a long time. What they do is they hire temporary labor in the summertime. So people will stay with them because they treat their workers very well, from what I can tell and what we were told. But summertime, they just can't keep up. And so they typically hire about, in Bernalillo County, they hire about 20 to 30 people every summer to help with the summer workload. Then those people disappear at the end of summer. A lot of them are students or they use Rocky Mountain Youth Corps and others. And then in the fall, winter, and spring, they go back to the staff that's been with them a long time. So that's another thing, those cultural, the kind of approach they've been using with glyphosate for so long is kind of embedded in the system, so it's hard for them to give up because they know that their workload's increasing when they stop using it.
Okay, well, here's a question to Diane, forwarding a question from Doris. Doris asks how to get rid of Bermuda grass without Roundup.
Any of the landscape folks in the audience have an answer for that? I'll tell you, I worked for a very wealthy person in Nob Hill many years ago when I still had black hair, and we dug out 3 feet of soil out of the yard and replaced it And they still had to fight it back because the roots under the sidewalks were still there. So I don't have a good answer for that. Maybe a kinder, gentler approach is to try to live with it instead of eradicating.